Want to break down on some of the latest topics from cons to the pros? We interview many individuals to share their knowledge about the news stories surrounding the teams and its players. This is Nothing But That Sports Talk. And welcome to Nothing But That Sports Talk. I'm Rafique Louison alongside Knox Louison. How you doing today?
I'm good, cuz. How you been?
Doing all right. And sports is back in some shape or form. We had NASCAR, we had UFC. We finally had some exhibition games for baseball being played, and for what we saw, it's just a taste of what's to come this season coming up as the players are getting ready to play in empty arena games this season.
Right.
So, if you see the games, what's your impression on it?
First and foremost, I think I mentioned this before. It's always good to have sports back. I'd like to say that I think too many times people discredit the importance of sports in our society. People try to make it seem like it's just something that's trivial and has no bearing, and it's just not true. Sports is important to a lot of people. It's a lot of people's employment. It's a lot of people's jobs and their occupations. So an athlete is very much an athlete, and he's employed by the league that he plays in, just like a doctor is employed by the hospital that they work for. So people try to trivialize it too much, and I don't like that. Sports is important to us. And I just want to also say that a lot of times when people say, well, athletes are good, they make a lot of money, people think about your LeBrons and your Mike Trouts and your Patrick Mahomes. Of course, those guys are the best of the best and they're compensated as such, but there are a lot of players who don't make that much money. There are a lot of players who are on minimum contracts, who are on 10-day contracts. We just saw the Orlando Magic that they had to lay off, I think, 31 workers because, they haven't been bringing in revenue. So it's important to have sports back. I'm happy for that. In regards to the empty seat arenas, it's going to be a challenge getting used to that. A lot of sports predicate themselves really highly on fan interaction and fan noise. I tried watching wrestling. It's extremely difficult to watch wrestling without a fan base because fans dictate the narrative. A good guy, sorry. An athlete's a good guy or a bad guy based on how the fans respond to him. In baseball, there's nothing like hearing that crowd roar when someone hits a home run or a grand slam. And my brother brought up to me, it's going to be weird to see a guy get dunked on in the NBA and fans don't erupt and go crazy. But, it's the new normal. We got to get used to it. I'm just happy to have sports back.
Yeah, but they are going to put some crowd noises onto these games, I heard. But let's see how
I heard
they've
been going back and forth with that, but I don't know how authentic that'll be. It's kind of weird having fake crowd noise. So,
Yeah, and for what we saw, there's a lot of WBA players that opted out of the season because they were too caught up on the social justice and supporting the Black Lives Matter music, like Renee Montgomery and Natasha Cloud from the Washington Mystics. Well, Renee Montgomery plays for the Atlanta Dream, but yeah. So, what are your impressions about that?
I don't knock any athlete who feels the need to stand up for social rights. There's nothing wrong with that. I do wish that some athletes would recognize that being an athlete provides them the platform to speak on social issues. The truth is, you can reach more people when you have a platform that reaches millions of people than you can on a platform that only reaches 1 million people, which a lot of times their Instagram accounts or their social media accounts reach to. But I don't knock them for it. It's their right. Stand up for what you believe in. And, we are in tough times and we're seeing a lot of atrocities happen based on inequalities. So I'm all for the athletes who want to step up and speak out. But I also wish some of them would recognize that your platform as an athlete allows you to reach more people.
Yeah, exactly. And they could actually, whether it's on or off the court, the athletes understand that the Black Lives Matter movement is a serious thing. It's so serious that whenever some lunatic decides to vandalize the Black Lives Matter mural in Manhattan, as I saw earlier in the news today, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Even if it's a black person doing it, it's a big deal. Like, come on.
Yeah, I think it's just important at this time to understand that we're trying to fight. We're trying to fight bigotry. We're trying to fight oppression. And we're trying to fight inequalities across the board. And it's important that we stand up collectively as a group of good-minded, good-hearted human beings. Forget about our differences. Forget about what makes us different on the surface. If you're at your core a good person, we should all stick together. And again, like I said before, if athletes want to take the route of not playing and doing their social work outside the court, that's fine. If they want to take the route of playing and still doing their social work while on the court, I think either way is fine, and I support that.
Yeah, so social justice and among other things are basically having an impact in the sports world right now, especially since well, the Toronto Blue Jays got rejected from playing in Canada, and now they're going to be playing their home games in Buffalo because of what we've been seeing. So yeah, at least Toronto's going to have a place to play. And on to the players that are playing in the league. Well, the NBA is coming back. It's only going to go down between 22 teams, and sadly, the Knicks are not in it. The Warriors are not in it. The Bulls are not in it. But a lot of great teams are there. So as far as the battle for the 8th seed, which team do you think is going to actually get the 8th spot for the Eastern Conference between the Wizards and the Magic and the Nets?
For the Eastern Conference 8th seed, the Nets roster is not even a Nets team. Like, there's guys on this team who weren't on this team 3 weeks ago or 2 days ago, and their roster just does not look like their natural team. It'll take a lot of cohesion and effort and coaching for them really to bring it together and find a style that works with all those new moving parts. And they have guys on their team who need the ball, so I'm not sure that's really going to work. They're really perimeter oriented. I really don't know how the Nets team's going to work out. Orlando has the best team out those three and should easily make it. But something also has to be said that the best player on all those three teams is Bradley Beal. He's a really dynamic player. A player like that gets hot for 5 or 6, maybe 8 games, and he can really just drive his team to the playoffs. So if you're asking me who do I think is going to make it, I think Orlando will make it. But yeah, I'm going to go to Orlando. Just because also Washington defense has been historically bad this year, so I don't think all of a sudden they're going to start playing defense. So I'm going to go to Orlando.
Yeah.
But of course, as a Brooklynite, I want the Nets to make it.
Yeah, I mean the Nets are like half a game ahead of the Orlando Magic for the 8th seed, but then again, who's to say they're not going to take? I mean,
but I thought the Nets was 7th though.
Yeah, the Nets were 7th. Seventh, meaning that they're ahead by half a game of Orlando Magic for the 8th spot. Meaning that if they lose, and Orlando Magic catches up to them, the Nets will fall to the 8th seed, and Orlando will get to number 7th. And ironically, the Nets have to play Orlando as one of the teams in the 8th game regular season restart.
Okay, so I'm going to say that the Nets will finish 7th and Orlando will finish 8th. So Washington's the odd team out.
Yeah, and let's not forget, well, the Nets are going to have their hands full because they got Sacramento, they got Orlando, they got Washington, they got, of course, the Milwaukee Bucks, so they only played once, and they got wrecked pretty hard the last time they played the Milwaukee Bucks. They may not be playing against any crowd, but we can't ignore the fact that it's going to be a tough competition for the Nets no matter who they get in round 1. And Shaquille O'Neal was playing delusional in an interview where he said the Nets could make it out of the first round. But I think it could potentially happen, but...
No, let's not even entertain that. There's no chance.
I mean,
hold on, when I say that, we're talking about barring an injury or an illness. The only how these bottom teams are going to win is if the team above them loses a player for injury or illness. Other than that, it's not happening. Let's not even entertain that.
Yeah, even though you're not playing, let's say the higher seeds are not going to have a crowd to back them up for 4 out of 7 games.
Here's the thing. The best teams don't need a crowd. You can't win a championship based on home court advantage. You win a championship being able to win on the road, so crowds don't really make a difference.
Yeah, you're right. We learned that in last year's NBA Finals with the Raptors and the Golden State Warriors. And the Raptors won every game in Golden State in their final 3 games of the playoffs. Well, that was before they moved to the Chase Center. But
I mean, if you think about it, I think all the last 4 NBA champions, with the exception of the Raptors, have all been crowned on the road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Golden State won in Cleveland. Cleveland won in Golden State. Golden State won twice in Cleveland. And then Toronto was the only one that won at home. So you don't really need crowds to win.
Yeah, actually, the Raptors clinched their championship on the road.
Oh, right. So, yeah, there we go. All the teams have won on the road.
Yeah. Now, on to the Western Conference. Out of the top, this is going to be a dogfight in the Western Conference because, of course, you have the Clippers, you have the Lakers, and you got the Denver Nuggets, you got the Rockets with James Harden and Russell Westbrook. And
Russell Westbrook's going to be out for a bit, right?
Yeah, he's going to be out, but he might come back. Zion Williamson's Pelicans when he comes back. So, yeah, it's going to be evenly matched. But as far as who gets the 8th seed, do you see Zion Williamson's Pelicans or John Morant's Memphis Grizzlies or Damian Lillard's Portland Trailblazers making it into the playoffs?
What's the current standing?
Well, the current standing is, I believe that it's the Memphis Grizzlies that hold the last spot up until that point.
Okay, so I think, and I'm not a conspiracy guy, I think the NBA was really trying to get New Orleans in because I think they have the weakest strength of schedule.
Yeah, they had the weakest strength of schedule, with the only exception of the Utah Jazz, the first game of the NBA restart. Every other
Okay.
team they're playing against playoff contenders or teams that are like winnable.
Okay, so I think the NBA was trying to get Zion into the playoffs. I'm not sure they make it just because I think Memphis was playing better as a team. Like, New Orleans has better talent. New Orleans is a far superior talent, has far superior talent on paper. But Memphis has been playing together basically the whole season. They haven't dealt with constant injuries. They haven't dealt with as much influx in their lineup changes and things like that. So I think they might be better poised to win. But if Zion comes back and Lonzo plays like Lonzo played before he before the shutdown, and if Brandon Ingram still plays like he was playing before, the Pelicans are going to be a tough team. Not just only for Memphis to hold off, but they're going to be a tough team that if they make it to the playoffs, youth will probably cause them to lose just because they have the inexperience, but they got a lot of talent in the team. But I'm going
Yeah,
Memphis.
but assuming that the team you just said wins the 8th seed, how many games you see him getting from the Los Angeles Lakers in the first round, or do you even see them getting out of the first round at all?
I don't see New Orleans getting out the first round just because, again, I think inexperience and who's stopping Anthony Davis? Come on. I always tell people they're talented players, they're good players, but then there's players who are on a different level from everybody else, and the Lakers have two guys like that. So it would tell you, barring injury, barring illness, the Lakers should probably beat them in five.
Yeah, I mean, because look at LeBron James at year 17. The guy literally looks like he could play another 10 years.
Crazy. He's leading the league in assists. It's insane. It's
Yeah,
insane.
and he's duking it out with Giannis Antetokounmpo for an MVP. It's too bad the MVP is only going to be given to a player based on all the games that happened before the NBA suspension, or else depending on what goes on in the NBA restart, you can actually have a better idea of who gets the MVP.
Well, actually, I think they played enough games to determine who the MVP is, and I'll be honest. I don't think there's a wrong answer. It's kind of take your pick. It's either LeBron or it's Giannis. I would say Giannis has been the best player consistently over the course of the entire season. But the last time we saw LeBron, he was literally going to work against the Clippers and the Bucks, and he was tearing them up. So your last memory of the NBA as we knew it was LeBron dominating. So it's possible people might lean, in favor of LeBron for the MVP. But I don't think there's a wrong answer. I think they both deserve it.
Yeah, not to mention LeBron surpassed Kobe Bryant for the all-time scoring list before Kobe died.
Well,
And you know
LeBron
what?
is just all-time great.
And you know what? If he keeps on progressing, he might even score the most all-time points ever.
It's possible, but I don't really want to see him play that long. So I hope he doesn't get to that point. I think if he wins a championship in LA, it's okay to tap out. He'd have accomplished so much. He'd be the first player ever to win 3 championships on 3 franchises. He'd potentially be the first player to ever win 3 Finals MVPs in 3 franchises. And he's just had a great body of work. He really doesn't need to prove anything else. I know he wants to prove stuff to himself to solidify his legacy, but to us fans who enjoy basketball, LeBron has nothing left to prove.
Yeah, unless you run into the Los Angeles Clippers. And you know what? We're possibly gonna be seeing a battle between 2 LA playoff teams, with the only exception is gonna be Orlando, non-Los Angeles. But if a Clippers and Lakers matchup were to happen, who do you think would win?
Oh man, that's a hard choice to make if you're betting on games. That's a hard accomplishment to do as a coach for either one of those teams. But as basketball fans, that's like a perfect dream come true, man. You're gonna watch literally 2 of the best players, 4 of the best players on the planet, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron, and AD. Literally 2 of the 3 best players on the planet, LeBron and Kawhi, and 2 guys who are kind of on a race for the same goal. Like LeBron and Kawhi are the only 2 players who now have a chance to win 3 championships on 3 different franchises and win 3 Finals MVPs on 3 franchises. So it's kind of a race to see who does it first. It's also a race to see who brings another championship back to the Los Angeles area. LeBron's trying to further bolster his resume and bolster the resume of the Lakers, and Kawhi's kind of put his stamp on, like, hey, look, I'm put the Clippers on the map. So honestly, it's just gonna be great to watch those 2 teams go at each other if they make it that far. And as a fan of Paul George, one of my favorite players too, so can't forget Paul George. If I had to make a decision today, and today's decisions don't count, I like to make my decisions closer to the playoffs. But today, I'd say the Lakers would find a way to win in 6 or 7. I don't think it'd be easy, but I think there's a chance that they could pull it off in 6 or 7.
Okay, now that's going to be a very interesting prediction because it's a battle between two LA teams. But I could probably go upset and pick the Clippers, but it's LeBron James, and the Clippers have never made it to the conference finals before.
Right.
Not even when Blake Griffin was playing. Not even when Elton Brand was on the roster. Not even when Lamar Odom was on the roster. The Clippers had so many great rosters throughout throughout their franchise, and they just could not get out of the second round.
Yeah, they've had some shortcomings. I mean, they went through a period where they were pretty awful, and then at a point in time, they started drafting and trading and signing better talent, and never really amounted to anything. The problem that teams will have going against the Clippers is they literally have two of the probably three best on-ball defenders in basketball in Kawhi. Well, four, if you want to throw Patrick Beverley there. Their perimeter defense is something we've never seen before. They got Patrick Beverley at the one. Paul George can interchange, 2 through 4. He can play shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and Kawhi Leonard can play small forward or power forward. Those guys are some of the best defenders we've seen like in the past 25 years of the sport, if not ever, in Kawhi Leonard's situation. So teams are going to have a hard time scoring on the perimeter against them. Where they are thin, though, is up front. Their best big man is Montrezl Harrell. He's about 6'9". The Lakers can throw JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard, and Anthony Davis out there. They can go LeBron big. If Kyle Kuzma ever gets his game together, they can throw him out there. He's pretty big too. They got Markieff Morris, who's also big. So you're going to see the Clippers have the perimeter defense on lock, but also the Lakers have a lot of bigs that they can throw at them to throw some problems. Again, I just think it's going to be a great series to watch. And my prediction today doesn't count because it's not my formal prediction, but I think the Lakers could squeak it out in 6 or 7. We'll see.
Yeah, and let's see if Patrick Beverley can prove that he can defend LeBron James like he did on Christmas Day last year. Because a lot of people forget how consistent Patrick Beverley could be and how underrated he is as a scorer and an assist man.
He's a really good defender, but I'll say this about playing great defense. Great defense kind of gets nullified by great offense. And at the end of the day, you can stop LeBron on one play, but can you stop him for 4 straight games? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't really think so either. And you know what? Well, it's kind of too early, but which NBA Finals matchup would you like to see?
Would I like to see, or do I think? I'll give you both. What I would like to see is the Lakers and the Celtics. What I think, hold on, I take that back. What I would like to see, based on teams that are in it, I would love to see the Heat and the Lakers because I love the Heat. It would be cool to see LeBron go against his former team. It'd be cool to see Jimmy Butler make it that far. What I think we're going to get, Boston versus Los Angeles in some type of way. Yeah. It's going to be the Celtics versus the Lakers or the Celtics versus the Clippers.
Yeah, but let's not forget the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis is having the season of his life.
I'm not forgetting that. Giannis doesn't, so far, and I'm not saying that he's not clutch or anything like that, but so far in his career, he hasn't been able to do it when it mattered in the playoffs. And, a lot of times we see guys score a lot of points, we see guys dominate, but sometimes it becomes hollow. It's just them dominating statistically for themselves. They haven't developed the ability to impact the game. And the impact in the game is not always scoring, it's not always defending. It's kind of understanding what the team needs in that moment. I just don't think he's learned that yet. I think it's possibly learned it this year, but that Boston roster is really tough, man. Kemba Walker at the 1, Jaylen Brown, and the guy who I think the world of, Jason Tatum's out there. Quiet is kept. Enes Kanter is almost impossible to guard at the 5. Big men can't guard him. I mean, he plays no defense, and that's the caveat with him. But offensively, he's such a tough guy to guard. I think the Celtics are clearly the best team in the Eastern Conference. Yeah. Clearly. I don't think it's close.
I don't blame you for making that pick because who wouldn't want to see another Lakers versus Celtics matchup?
And or Clippers versus Celtics.
Yeah. A team that isn't the Lakers playing against the Boston Celtics. But then again, I would like to see Lakers versus Celtics again. Just because, come on. That's a rivalry that we've all been watching since, the 1960s. Well, we wasn't really alive at the time.
Right.
But you were alive partially when the Lakers and Celtics were having their moments. And then also, let's not forget Kobe and Paul Pierce in 2 years in a 3-year span. When I was
also, one of my favorite players of all time is Kemba Walker. So it'd be really good to see him get a chance to an NBA championship, and I think would also punch his Hall of Fame ticket. He'd be a guy who had a great magical college run that ended up in a national championship. He'd be a guy that is an all-time leader in an organization like the Charlotte Hornets, and then to punch home that Hall of Fame ticket with an NBA championship with the Celtics, I'd love to see that. So As a fan, I would love to see the Celtics and the Lakers go at it.
Yeah, well, who isn't a fan of Kemba Walker? I mean, we all
Yeah, man.
remember Cardi and Kemba 2011
You
back
know
in the
it, man.
day. Like, before we get to the next topic, why don't we just reflect on that a little bit? Like, what went through your mind when you see UConn and Cardi and Kemba have the season of their life in 2011?
So I've always been a fan of UConn basketball. My first memory of really getting into college basketball was UConn versus Georgetown, Allen Iverson versus Ray Allen. Ray Allen hits a shot that floated, well, not a floater, but like he's floating in the air when he hits a shot mid-range to beat Georgetown. That's like my first real college basketball memory. So I became a UConn fan after that. You know, I love all the guys who came through the program: Ray Allen, Ben Gordon, Emeka Okafor, Richard Hamilton. But Kemba is from New York. He's a Bronx guy, so I kind of heard of him when he was in high school. And when he got to UConn and he was in that second year, the junior year, yeah, was he a junior, sophomore year? He was just on a roll. And one of the things you love in sports is watching a player just get hot. And when you see a guy get hot, he just starts he starts almost performing like Superman. He's doing these things you can't imagine him doing. And in the grand scheme of things, you're like, man, he's like 6'1" barely. He's 100 and maybe 60, 70 pounds. And he's just going out there and he's wheeling his team to a championship. You know, shout out to Jeremy Lamb, who's also out there too. But it was great to watch as a fan. I always say this, one of the greatest feelings that you have as a sports fan is watching your team or your program win a championship. And watching them do it in spectacular fashion, you know, the whole cardiac Kemba with the game winners and the step back on Brad Wanamaker in Pittsburgh to hit the shot in the Big East tournament. Was a great feeling. He's one of my favorite players of all time.
Yeah.
Easily one of my favorite players
To me, the guy is underrated. He can come through the clutch. He can catch you napping with his crossovers. He can drop 60-point games when you least expect it. You remember that 60-point game, which ended up being on a buzzer beater lost by Jimmy Butler's 76ers, but you can't get over it. Kemba Walker had the game of his life.
He definitely did. He's a talented player. You know, I'm by no means diminishing Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving's a great player, and he's an all-time great. He hit one of the greatest shots ever. He brought Cleveland a championship. I thought for a very long time a lot of the praise that Kyrie was getting, guys like Damian Lillard and Kemba Walker deserved the same amount of praise, but they weren't playing alongside a high-profile player, so they weren't getting all that exposure. Honestly, one of the best things that could happen to him was actually going to Boston, because now he's on a national level, and teams in the world seeing like, yo, this guy's not just scoring a lot of points on a bad team. He's a guy who can score a lot of points when it matters. He's a guy who can get his shot off. He's a guy who's a great teammate, a great leader. And again, if he ends up winning a championship on Boston, as much as I'm in New York and I don't cheer for the Celtics, I would have no problem with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have no problem with that either. I mean, Boston needs to make sure that they're ahead of the Lakers in the championships. Because you know what? A lot of people don't talk about the fact that the Lakers can tie the Boston Celtics for the most championships in NBA history.
I didn't know that.
You never hear enough people realize that. I mean, to be fair, this is going to be the first time Lakers are in the playoffs since, of course, you know, Kobe Bryant, since 2013. Well, Kobe Bryant was on the roster, but he didn't play when they got swept by the San Antonio Spurs in 2013. Yeah. 2013 had so many miserable playoff series in a certain way. But we'll get into that later or another podcast episode or whatever. But yeah, on to the whole idea behind the NBA bubble. Like, when you read it, let the whole world know what went through your mind.
So when I started reading the details of the bubble, I commend the NBA for being progressive and trying to patch as many holes in protecting players as possible. I don't think it's possible to protect the players 100%. Number one, a lot of what's going on, we don't have a lot of information on modes of transmission and stuff like that. And number two, a lot of players don't follow rules really well, and we're seeing that. A lot of guys are breaking the protocols and the guidelines. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. A couple of guys have broken protocol and guidelines in terms of protecting themselves and keeping everybody safe. But ultimately, I'll say this. I just commend the NBA for making an effort to trying to find a way to get this done and getting basketball back on the court.
Exactly. And hopefully we get the same results when college basketball starts, because a lot of fall sports are either not happening this season or they're only reserved to conference-only games. When you read that, what went through your mind with all the cancellation and postponing or the reduction to only conference games for the fall sports?
I'm not mad about that. Again, you know, to kind of piggyback on my opening statement and to speak on that, athletes are athletes. That's what they do. They play sports. It's important to get them out there playing their sport and doing the things that they love or doing the things they're employed to do. So I'm not against leagues and college basketball saying, or college sports saying we'll postpone some sports to the spring and other sports will condense to just conference schedules. I'm okay with that. And if the players don't want to play, I'm okay with them not wanting to play either. I'm okay with that.
I mean, come on, they're college athletes. Like they're not getting paid to play like the NBA athletes are getting paid.
Yeah.
They're really not. And well, a lot of college athletes they have to like go to classes remotely, so it's no surprise to me. It really does not. And you know what? The one sport that whose regular season at least did not get affected, the NFL. Like, what do you think about the efforts of the NFL trying to come back? Well, obviously it's the same thing you've been saying with the other sports you're talking about, but if there's any other details you want to add on to it, like, what you think about that with the NFL?
The NFL, I think is really tricky because they really haven't spoken much while everything's been going on, and they never at any point in time led you to believe that they weren't going to play a normal NFL schedule. They've been very much business as usual since the rest of the league and rest of the sports have shut down. So I'm kind of curious to see, is it a matter of they just found a proper way to do things, or is it they're not taking things seriously enough? I'm not sure which one it is, but they've been very much business as usual. They're kind of like, the NFL is going to start on time. We're going to play the games we're going to play. It's going to be okay. And I'm just curious to see how it plays out. I'm not 100% sure how it's going to play out.
But you gotta keep in mind, the NFL games every team plays once a week, with one bye week, and well, twice a week if you count the Thursday games. But yeah,
right, I know. But they also have very physical, close proximity practices, and it's a very physical, close proximity contact sport. So I'm just curious. Like, I understand, we know how this thing is going on around the world. I mean, we have some idea of preventative measures and things like that. So I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just simply saying I'm curious to see if their silence and their casual nature has been because they've figured it out, or it's because they haven't taken it seriously enough. So we're just going to see when it starts and see how it goes.
Well, they have been coming up with a lot of protocols, like how to put on like a certain type of helmets when they're when on the field, and not to mention and don't forget wearing a mask. This is what you would not do whenever we go outside. As long as you put on the mask, and well, it's tough to maintain social distance when you're on the field.
In a contact sport, yeah.
In a contact sport, so yeah. But I mean, a lot of people don't talk about that. And compared to the MLB, where you're not really close to each other all the time, except when you're on the bench. MLB decided to postpone it anyway because one way or another, these athletes had to be close to each other. If not on the field, then in the bench.
Which is true, but I was curious to see why baseball had such a hiccup. Just because, as you mentioned, there really is very few contact. And contact is left to a minimum in terms of maybe just like celebrations. But by and large, you're kind of really already distanced quite a bit from guys when you're actually playing the sport. Much like tennis and golf, where it's like you really don't have much contact with anybody else. So those sports, I guess everybody kind of came together all at once, and that's good too. So again, happy to have sports back.
Yeah, I know. I'm really happy to have sports back too. And we're going to be having more sports to talk about as the season goes along. And yeah. We have the NFL back. Well, the NFL hasn't really said nothing yet, but what they are saying is they're going to update the Washington Redskins name.
Yeah.
What impressions about that?
So, long overdue. They should have changed that name, not only just for the social implications and how insensitive it is of a name, but it's just antiquated. It's an old type of thinking. Teams are not actively being named after Native Americans and things like that anymore. So they need to change their name. I'm glad they have. I am very different from everybody else. I think there's a few other teams who need to change their names as well. And there really hasn't been much outcry or backing against it. I think the Chiefs, as much as I love the Chiefs and I'm a Chiefs fan, they need to change their names. I think the Atlanta Braves need to change their names. I think the Knicks, I'm not sure how the Knicks have escaped this. They need to change their names. They're not named after Knickerbocker pants. They're named after Father Knickerbocker, who's a Dutch settler and is the image of New York. Teams should not be named after ethnicities. Sorry, we have to be consistent with this thing. So if you're not going to be called the Redskins, you shouldn't be called Dutch settlers either. Just because I just think we're past that point in time. Like, teams can think of far more creative names, but I don't think the Knicks will change the names. The Braves already said they're not changing the names, and the Chiefs have pretty much said the same thing too.
Yeah, but you know what? Up until now, you never really realized how offensive Redskins could be to racism. Nobody ever. I never really
Well,
thought
I
about
don't
that.
say I wouldn't say
Like
people haven't
you gotta
realized
keep in mind.
I don't know about they haven't realized. It's obvious. Redskins is an offensive name. It's just that right now the climate is so hot that people are really coming down on everything. But people have always known. It's not the first time people have protested and asked the Redskins to change their name. This is just the first time they agreed to do it. But this has been going on for the better part of 20 years now. They've been asking the Redskins to change their name. And Daniel Snyder, has been very adamant against it. He's adamant against changing it now. It's just that sponsors are now starting to pull out or threaten to pull out, and that's why he decided to do it. He didn't do it because he thought it was a good idea.
I mean, it's all business with the NFL, and not
Yep,
to
it's
mention
all
all
business.
the alleged sexual harassment content that the NFL staff is going through with the women in that field. That's just
Yeah, that
a lot of
Washington team
nonsense.
is dysfunctional and they garbage, so they need to change. They need a full makeover.
Yeah,
You know what? Not to sound like not to go off on a tangent, but a lot of these teams that are such breeding grounds for dysfunction and losing, these organizations, the leagues need to step in more often. The Knicks, the Redskins, the Clippers at a point in time back, a couple, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where these teams are not just only an embarrassment on the court, but also an embarrassment in public sector and the business sector. These organizations and these leagues need to step in more and correct the wrong of these places with these teams.
yeah, you're right. But on another note, though, what makes a good team name for an NFL or an MLB or an NBA team in your
I
mind?
think, I think teams should have some type of connection to their city. There are some exceptions based on teams who moved out. The Utah Jazz and originally were in New Orleans. That's where the Jazz comes in. The Lakers were originally in Minneapolis. That's where the Laker comes in. But by and large, I think a team should be named after something historical or something that represents that city that they play in.
Yeah, that is true. And well, there's just a lot the changes coming up in the upcoming season, and
Yep.
I look forward to it as we come to an episode. As we come to an end of this episode, of nothing but that sports talk. Thank you for stopping by, Knox Louison. And
Anytime.
as when we get to if sports continues, the next time you're on, we will talk more about the NBA playoffs. We can talk more about MLB. We're going to talk pretty much everything that's actually going on in the sports world right now. After basically going 4 months without anything to talk about other than just the Michael Jordan documentary, the passing of Kobe Bryant, is just so much going
Yep.
on. So all the big balls out there, get your head in the game.